Hello and welcome to another episode of Strange Things Are Happening. I'm your host, Jonathan Gray. Not too long ago I was watching YouTube when I came across a rebroadcasted video of an episode of WMUR's New Hampshire Chronicle. The topic was New Hampshire folklore, and they brought up a creature called the Derry Fairy. They even interviewed Derry town historian Rick Holmes. The description Rick gave of the creature caught my attention. What was even more intriguing was Rick Holmes held up a picture of an alien in reference to an artistic likeness of what the Derry Fairy kind of looked like. At that moment, I just knew I had to interview Rick Holmes myself and get to the bottom of this Derry Fairy situation. So I contacted Rick Holmes through email and set up an interview. Rick told us that the account of the Derry Fairy was based on letters sent to Walter N. Webb, an investigator for the Center for UFO Studies in Boston. A man named Alfred Horn contacted Mr. Webb to tell him about his encounter with a little green man known as the Derry Fairy. Webb is a former employee of the Charles Hayden Planetarium in Boston, where he spent 32 years as senior lecturer, assistant director, and operations manager. Not to mention he was the first investigator of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO sighting. I contacted Mr. Webb to ask him about the Horn encounter, as Rick Holmes mentioned that there were handwritten correspondence between Mr. Webb and Mr. Horn somewhere out there. Walter Webb was very responsive to my request for information about the Horn encounter. He stated that, "I did find references to Horn in several exchanges between NICAP's Dick Hall and me. Apparently, as a result of hearing me on a UFO discussion on Boston radio station WBZ, Horn wrote me about two dramatic sightings he had claimed to have had, one of which was the little green man. I sent Dick his letter for an opinion. Then I forwarded to Dick Horn's reply to my letter asking me for more information about his LGM, Little Green Man, report. I had commented, "If you think an interview is warranted, I am prepared to make a trip to New Hampshire to pay Mr. Horn a visit." NICAP's final answer, December 5th, 1962, appeared to be, while the case was intriguing, it was of low priority, although Hall said, "I am returning Horn's letter herewith. It is not to be found in my correspondence files, but it is obvious to me that I did not follow up with an investigation." I read the Richard Holmes piece in the Derry News, November 13th, 2008, which did give a description of the 1956 encounter. Walt Webb. Unfortunately, this conclusion left us with very little to work with as far as leads go. Rick Holmes and Walter N. Webb were very helpful with giving us as much information as they could. So with that said, it was now up to myself and my team to investigate the claim nearly 60 years later.
Hey, I'm Rick Holmes. I'm the town historian here in Derry, and I've been that kind of for 40 years. We're standing over here in Derry, and this is just about the 60th anniversary of the sighting of the little green man here in Derry. Well, all we know, because it wasn't in the newspapers, was Alfred wrote a letter in 1962, and then he wrote another letter in 1964 to an expert on the paranormal, talking about it. Now, it happened on December 15th, about 6 years before that, in 1956. At that time, Alfred Hahn was living here in Derry, just a little ways from where I'm standing, and he was about mid-70s, not a young man. He was born in Halifax, in Nova Scotia, immigrated as a boy and kind of lived in Massachusetts before moving here. But he had a small house here in Derry on Barry Road, and it was December, and so as per tradition, you have to go out and get a Christmas tree. And he had about 8 acres of land, and good chance he wandered on to somebody's acreage to get a Christmas tree. And while he was out there, he came to a small clearing, one of these natural clearings, and there he saw a little man with a green hue to his skin, and he stood about 2 foot tall. His skin was wrinkly and kind of hung down like that on an elephant. He had kind of a round, bulbous head, and where his eyes were, they were kind of like deep sockets. He had little bitty arms and little bitty legs, And that's about all he described. Well, Alfred Hahn kind of stared at the man, not making any noise, and he stared at him, and I guess the little green creature stared back, and after a while, Alfred Hahn realized that if this was a story he would tell in Derry, nobody would believe him. They would believe that he was drunk or addled or just confused by being an old man in his mid-70s, like me. So he decided that he was going to take that sack he was carrying with him and try to grab the little green creature and take him home as proof, as a trophy. Well, when he tried to grab him, the creature suddenly made this ear-piercing scream, and Mr. Hahn backed off, and the little man just kind of disappeared. And that's the end of the story. We have nothing else to add. Mr. Hahn apparently didn't want to tell anybody here in Derry, so it didn't appear in the Derry News, and it didn't get recorded until about 6 years later when he wrote those series of letters. Not that my knowledge, and of course people probably would keep it secret if they did see something.
Locals of Derry, alongside some other publications, coined the creature that Alfred Hahn encountered as the Derry Fairy. I don't feel that the term fairy accurately describes what Alfred Hahn witnessed in the woods of Derry, New Hampshire, December 15, 1956. Based on the description given by Mr. Hahn, the creature seems more closely related to what would be referred to as a real gnome of the Black Forest kind. Not the pointed hat and coveralls kind of gnome, but what a true gnome would look like in the scientific sense, or even a goblin of sorts based on the physical description given by Mr. Hahn, if you choose to view it from a cryptozoological perspective. Mr. Hahn describes the creature as approximately 2 feet tall with elephant-textured greenish skin, a large dome-shaped head, 2 small slits for a nose, short stubby arms and legs, with long basset hound-type ears, feet with no toes, and large filmed-over eyes that reminded him of a reptile. All of these features suggest biologically that the creature is made to burrow and dwell in dark places, possibly underground or in caves. The description of the eyes could denote that the creature's vision is based on the thermal spectrum, or even based on movement, but it could also be completely blind. The creature's ears would make great covering for the ear canals if it was a burrowing type of creature. The flaps would protect the ear canals from dust and dirt. Taking old folklore into account, it would make sense to assume that there are plenty of elves, fairies, and gnomes running around in the shadows in the woods of Derry. But that's just one perspective. Another idea is that the creature could be an extraterrestrial. With the description given by Mr. Hahn, there are some remarkable similarities to greys and reptilian aliens. The history of ufology even coins the term little green men to make reference to extraterrestrials, and Alfred Hahn uses that exact phrase to describe the creature he saw. What if Alfred Hahn really did encounter an alien that day? In an article written by Rick Holmes about the Hahn encounter, Rick implies that Mr. Hahn and the creature stared at each other for about 20 minutes. A 20-minute staring contest with this creature is a highly unusual scenario in itself. In ufology, staring directly into the eyes of an alien creature is usually a precursor to an alien abduction scenario. Aliens have been known to put people into trance-like states during the abduction process. Several abductions start with a creature staring into the abductee's eyes for extended periods of time. Most abductees think that this event only lasts for moments, but in reality, they come to find that several hours have passed. This phenomena is known as missing time. When it comes to strange sightings of unusual things in Derry, this strange creature doesn't stand alone. Over the years, several UFO reports have been made by Derry residents. Do a quick search of the National UFO Reporting Center's website and you'll see that Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction case wasn't the only alien-related event to take place in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is literally peppered with UFO encounters and sightings of strange, unusual creatures. For those of you unfamiliar with the Betty and Barney Hill case, I'll give you a snapshot of the event. Betty and Barney Hill were driving home from vacation back in September of 1961. They saw a light in the sky near Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. They pulled over to check it out, and they were abducted by aliens. It's probably one of the most famous top 10 close encounter cases in the history of ufology. So when you really think about it, labeling the creature that Alfred Horn saw as a fairy lends more confusion to the subject than anything. Fairies in folklore look nothing like the description of the creature given by Mr. Horn. In fact, I believe the idea of this creature being a fairy comes from the story of the fairy queen Sinead that helped Hannah Duston escape her captors back in March of 1697 by using fairy magic to put Hannah's captors to sleep and allowing Hannah to kill them and escape unharmed, according to Miss J.G. McMurphy of Derry, New Hampshire, cited in Peter Muse's New England Folklore blog. Aside from that mess of misconception surrounding the identity of this creature, the Alfred Horn creature stands alone as something other than a fairy in my professional opinion. If you want to reference what a real fairy looks like, try looking up L.A. Marzulli's Fairy Corpse from Mexico. The background goes, a young man was at the side of a road relieving himself when he came across the body of an unusual winged creature. This creature looked injured and apparently was freshly killed. After an analysis of the body, the cause of death was declared as a shotgun wound from birdshot rounds, as indicated in the x-rays available on the L.A. Marzulli website. If this is in fact a real phenomena, which it seems to be, then you'll see a dramatic difference between L.A. Marzulli's fairy and Alfred Horn's Little Green Man. Upon further study of cases involving little green men, I came across an incident that took place in Pennsylvania in 1981. The account describes a creature eerily similar to the one Alfred Horn describes in his story. 5 boys, 4 brothers and their friend, all from Arnold, Pennsylvania, ages ranging from 11 to 16, were hanging out by a railway one Saturday afternoon when the youngest boy, Chris, came across what he thought was a green trash bag from about 50 feet away. Upon closer inspection, Chris realized that he was seeing a little creature squatting down with his back towards him. Suddenly, Chris got the overwhelming urge to catch the creature because he wanted to take it home, so he crept up on the creature and successfully grabbed it. Chris started yelling for the other boys to come help him subdue the creature, but just like in the Horn incident, the creature wiggled and squealed so much that Chris was forced to drop the creature. The creature then ran off into a drain pipe, never to be seen again. All 5 of the boys described the creature as green, with elephant-textured skin that looked wet even though it was dry, and rubbery according to Chris, the boy that momentarily caught the creature. The kids went on to describe the creature as just under 3 feet tall, naked with large ears and nipples like a human, with a muscular chest and a 1-inch long tail. It walked upright on 2 legs as it ran away. All of the kids' stories matched, said Police Sergeant Jim D'Argencio of the Arnold, Pennsylvania Police Department. There was a full police investigation that led to masses of people looking for this creature on a street ironically named Horn Boulevard that ran parallel to the Allegheny River. This particular encounter was reported in an article in Fate magazine in 1982 titled "The Little Green Man Who Got Away." So now that you know a little bit more about these encounters, let's go visit the Derry Town Forest and see what we can find. I am at the Derry Town Forest right now, and we're setting up some of the trap cams, and I will show you. So, see if we got a few of these bad boys. So hopefully tonight we'll catch something. Wish us luck. The sun is going down. It's getting dark now. We've been hiking for a little while, and we're probably a few acres behind some property lines. So hopefully tonight we'll be able to catch something on our cameras. We're about to do our first thermal sweep. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We have to do this throughout the night to check the perimeter. What is that? You see that right there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's friggin' freaky. My EMF just went off. In 1956, December 15th, 1956, Alfred Horn went into the woods to go cut down some Christmas trees. And in doing so, he came across a little green man that, from the description given by Richard Holmes, seemed to be the likeness of an alien of some type. A lot of stories in the neighborhood kind of made it seem like it was Sinead, the Derry Fairy, the one who helped Hannah Dustin escape from the Indians that kidnapped her. But my theory is that it's something altogether different. It's kind of freaky out here at night, huh, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another creature in Derry that the Derry folks called the Wood Devil, and it's very similar to another creature called the Hide Behind. And the Hide Behind is a creature that can walk through the woods behind you. It stalks you, and it can hide behind any tree that it wants to hide behind, and it can change the shape of its body. So that is not something we want to encounter out here tonight. If you stay really still, everybody stay really still, you can hear the stillness. So over here, Brittany has an EMF detector out. And the reason she has the EMF detector out is that instead of looking for spirits or any kind of energy being produced by any kind of ghost or ethereal creature, we're looking for something along the lines of EMFs caused by technology. Something like a cloaking device, something like an UFO, something like that, because based on the description given by Alfred Horn, we believe that this might be some type of extraterrestrial or cryptid creature of some kind. And so that's why we're doing the EMF sweep out here right now.
While he was out there, he came to a small clearing, one of these natural clearings, and there he saw a little man with a green hue to his skin, and he stood about 2 foot tall. His skin was wrinkly and kind of hung down like that on an elephant. He had kind of a round, bulbous head, and where his eyes were, they were kind of like deep sockets. He had little bitty arms and little bitty legs, and that's about all he described. I've kind of sketched it myself and not come close, and probably the closest you can come to is looking at what that one in Texas kind of looks like, laying on the autopsy table.
So over here, we have some Christmas trees. I don't know if you could see them very well, but we got some pine trees going on here. And these are pretty much what Alfred Horn was in the woods for to begin with. He wanted to cut down some Christmas trees so he could have a nice, merry little Christmas. And all of a sudden, while he's cutting down the tree, he notices something was staring at him. It was a little creature about 2.5 feet tall. And it just locked eyes with him. And I guess, from the way the story goes, they stared at each other for about 20 minutes. Now, that's a really long time for a creature and a man to have a staring contest in the woods, especially in the wintertime. I mean, it's cold. You want to just kind of go down outside, cut down the tree, and leave. So Alfred Horn stared at this creature, and then finally he said, you know what? Nobody's going to believe me in town. I want to go and grab this creature and bring him back. And he had a burlap sack.
He decided that he was going to take that sack he was carrying with him and try to grab the little green creature and take him home as proof, as a trophy. Well, when he tried to grab him, the creature suddenly made this ear-piercing scream, and Mr. Hahn backed off, and the little man just kind of disappeared.
Completely vanished, almost like it dissipated like a ghost, or maybe it even just disappeared from like a cloaking device that it had. But 20 minutes, that's a long time. And the reason that I find that it's interesting that they stared at each other for 20 minutes is usually when you encounter an extraterrestrial of some type, a lot of people will say that these creatures stared at them for an extended period of time. It felt like, seconds, but hours had passed, or vice versa. So that's something that caught my attention with the entire case. So that's why I believe that it might be something extraterrestrial. Am I blinding you? Sorry.
Cross the streams.
Don't cross the streams. It is really friggin' cold outside. You can see my breath. That's another thing. When you're in the woods and it's cold and you're taking any kind of video, that's something that you have to keep track of whenever you're outside doing an investigation in the cold weather, especially in cemeteries. You see a lot of these people go and they record stuff in cemeteries, and it's totally useless data because people breathe and they forget to hold their breath while they're taking a picture. And it's even harder when you have a video camera. People forget that just because the night vision IR lights can't be seen by the human eye, that they're not going to catch the water droplets in the air, but they actually do catch the water droplets and they do reflect off of them, and it could create a ghostly image of some type. So be very mindful about that whenever you're breathing. Well, it's been a long night. It's getting really cold out. We've been out here for several hours. It's time for us to go pack everything up and go home and go over the data that we collected tonight. So I took the time to go through all of the trap cams, and I couldn't find not one thing that stood out to me. We didn't even get any raccoons or deers or anything. I mean, the woods was eerily silent that night. During the investigation, we kept running into brick walls. I contacted Joseph Citro, the author of Weird New England, whose book was mentioned in an article I read about the Derry Fairy, featuring Rick Holmes. I believe that the story went mainstream after being described in Citro's book. I contacted Mr. Citro, and he vaguely remembered where he originally gathered the information for the story. I thought it was a bit odd, as I typically remember most of my own research. Also, the book it was cited in was published just 12 years ago, which isn't very long in my opinion. But he does write a lot of books with short stories in them, so I guess it's not that far-fetched to forget a paragraph he wrote 12 years ago. I asked Rick Holmes if he knew of any living relatives left over from the Horn family, and if any of them still lived locally. This was his response.
I've checked. He had about 6 brothers and sisters, and all of them seem to have passed. Yeah, Alfred never married, and I've never been able to really track down any of the Horn folks. I've tried.
I attempted to collect information on public record, but no mention of the Horn family was to be found in the historical archives. So was the Derry Fairy just a hoax made up by a bored old man looking for some excitement? Or did something genuinely happen to Alfred Horn in the woods of Derry, New Hampshire? A sighting of the same exact creature was seen in Arnold, Pennsylvania over 25 years later. A lot of things about the claim tells me as an investigator that the story might be made up. But then there's the small details that were in the police report by the Arnold, Pennsylvania Police Department that kind of gives me chills and lends credibility to the Horn sighting. So do I believe the encounter with the little green man is true? I feel that I speak for many paranormal investigators when I say we all want to see validation in our efforts. Sometimes we get a glimpse of the elusive in a blurry photo or the shadows out of the corner of our eyes. But at the end of this particular investigation, we had little evidence that went beyond local folklore. If the Derry Fairy is real, then he's hiding in the woods of Derry somewhere, and it's only a matter of time before someone else comes across the little green man known as the Derry Fairy. Until next time, everyone, this has been your host, Jonathan Gray. Remember, no matter how normal and boring your day has been, somewhere out there, strange things are happening.